Hello, everybody. Carlos Osvaldo here from Freestyle Talks, speaking directly from Maputo in Mozambique. Welcome to another edition of Freestyle Talks. This time is going to be a very different conversation with a very special guest, and we will find out about how to be a vampire. So let me tell you that for me as a writer, I'm fascinated by books, by stories, by myths, uh, and by uncommon natures, uncommon stories. So this is what makes us writers strive and create. So during my teenage years, I watched a lot of movies about vampires. I've read a lot of books about Dracula, vampires, and this has always been something that really was an incredible source of imagination. Um, and later, I wrote my books, and and these stories about these myths have always been in the back of my mind, like mermaids, like uh, Atlantis. So all these worlds who are not common, who are not known to us, are fascinating to me as a writer. Uh, and when I'm doing what I'm doing also here at Free South Talks is not just speaking with the people I know or my friends or people I work with, but is also to inspire me into knowing different people, unexpected worlds, new realities, new stories, and to take myself also out of a comfort zone and to find out more about these incredible stories and incredible people who are out there. So I met my guest for this afternoon, Darsuss. He's an American. I met him on Instagram. Actually, I saw his profile page on Instagram, and I invited him to talk about his journey and his work. And gladly he said yes. So I'm really excited to have the conversation we are going to have this afternoon. As always, feel free to use the chat button and send us your comments, your questions, because as we often do, freestyle is not just Carlos and guests, but the audience is always a part of a conversation. So I'm going to call my guests to join us live. Let me call Darsush. Hello, Darsush.
Tudo bom, Carlos? How you doing?
I'm good. Welcome to Freestyle Talk.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for accepting my invitation, Darsush. Really a pleasure to welcome you here. And you are our second American guest. First, we had Hotep Jesus. I think it was back in June. We
I
talked
saw.
about Hotep, yes. So we spoke about blackness,
Mhm.
and it was a really powerful conversation we had. You know, Hotep is full of uh, tough ideas and tough arguments, and he brought us a little bit of knowledge and content about the history of Black people, and a lot of materials to make us think about ourselves, and especially us as Africans, right?
Yes, always good.
So yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you here, and uh, we have already comments welcoming you. So thank you, Lam, for sending this question.
Sure, man.
Uh, so, so Hotep, I have three initial questions before we start the conversation in a broader way. First is, what are vampires? That's my first question.
That is a big question. Vampires are many things to many people. But I like to start at the most basic, kind of simplest definition. And a vampire is a being that absorbs or draws on the life force of others to sustain itself. And so you'll find that common trait throughout many of the myths and stories throughout many cultures, as you mentioned.
And when you say a being, is it a human being or different forms?
That's up to the debate. Some people say that, depends on the mythology, depends on the story. But yeah, being can be many things.
Mm-hmm. And my second question is, are you a vampire?
It depends on one's point of view. I would say yes, but I'm open to other people saying no, and they can hold that opinion.
Cool. So yeah. So and the third question I think is what we proposed ourselves to talk about is how to be a vampire, and this is our team
Yes.
for a conversation. But before jumping to this topic on how to be a vampire, I really wanted to know more about you. So tell me who Darsuss is, where do you live, in which state, and a little bit about your background and your work.
Okay. Well, I guess I can talk about my physical space. I'm from Washington D.C. in the United States. So when you hear all that stuff about on the news about Washington is doing this and doing that and directing the country and all the politicians, I'm in that area. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've lived in this area my whole life. But I still want to be a global citizen. I still want to travel. I just haven't had much chance to do so. Maybe this is part of that. Traveling through creativity and other ways in the occult. I'm still a regular person. I still have a day-to-day life. But Darsuss is the night side of that life. It is the vampire that I've built and created and grown into in a way. It's at one point, an identity, but also pure self-expression. So I wouldn't say Darsuss is separate from me. I am Darsuss, but it is a part of myself that can't always be expressed in every single situation. So there is sometimes a separation, and you can kind of see how maybe I can't be Darsuss 24/7 of the day. So that's how you can look at Darsuss.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about you as a teenager, maybe at 12 or 13 or 15 years old. How were you back then?
Well,
at school, yeah, with friends at school, in the family.
I was a lot better.
And when did you start? And when did you start feeling this side of Darsuss? When did Darsuss came up to your life?
Well, my interest in vampires has been lifelong. Like you said, you kind of hear the stories and watch the movies and shows when you're a lot younger, and it really sparks your imagination. So for me, I remember being in middle school, which is in the United States, we have like elementary school, and then we have high school. And between that is 2 years in middle school. And I was sitting at the lunch table and I asked people, why aren't we vampires? Why don't we just be vampires? And other people just thought it was crazy. Thought it was like, oh, it was a far-fetched idea, and it was, and it still is. But I'm a person who doesn't like to sit back and just watch and just consume. I like to create. So to me, there's nothing really stopping one from pursuing anything you want, even if it's outside of the norms. And to find that there's a whole flourishing community of other self-proclaimed vampires just serves to validate that.
Mm-hmm. And were you into sports? And were you a good student? Were you into dating a lot? Tell me about that.
So I did do cross country and track, and maybe a little bit of soccer before that. That's the extent of my sports, but I wasn't really much for weightlifting and all that. I'm pretty skinny, but I was a good student. Not so much now. I'm getting back there, but I was a good student leading up to college. Maybe that's why my tag is death after college, because I kind of flunked in college. That's another story. Dating, maybe that's part of it. If you look at the vampire connects a lot of things like death, sex, so many things, disease, darkness. And so I really came into my own, and when you think about dating, as I grew into Darsuss some more. So I didn't really have much of those dating experiences prior. It was very minor, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And was there any special movie or any special book that really is your reference or your favorite in this vampire world and discovery?
We got Blade right here. Blade. We got Blade 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Also, Underworld with Kate Beckinsale would be a good starting point. Yeah, that entry scene when have you seen Underworld or Blade?
Blade, I've seen. I
Mhm.
don't remember about Thunderworld if I've seen it or not. I'm not sure.
Do you
I don't know
remember?
if you have a cover close by.
I thought I did. I don't have it on me.
It's okay. I'll Google it
No worries.
after.
Do you remember that scene in the intro of Blade when they kind of are driving into the club and then like the blood rains down? You know, in the dance
I
club. That's a very iconic scene in Blade, and it really captures a lot of people's imagination of what like the urban vampire can be. A bit separate from like the ideas of a vampire in a castle. Makes it
Mhm.
more attainable in a way.
Yes, that's and that visual of contrast of dark and red, or and the darkness and the powerful of black, and the contrast with the blood. I think it's very visual and very strong, right? And
I would
it
agree.
can really make an impact in you.
And the music too. You can't forget about
Yeah,
that.
the music too,
Yeah.
definitely.
Mhm.
And tell me, Darcy, about that time when you started to feel that those thoughts about having those thoughts about what if, what if, what if. Uh, so how old were you back then?
Well, it's kind of been a lifelong journey, but at the same time, actually, being out on social media and, as I say, coming out of the coffin, that's been maybe 3 to 4 years now or something like that. So before that, it was more casual, more just my own thing, but it's fairly recent since when I've been on social media. So I'd say 3 to 4 years for social media and kind of more indefinite on and off throughout my life for the just vampire interest in general.
Hmm. And how did people close to you saw this change in your life, and how did family, friends reacted to this
Well,
new side of you?
it can be quite weird to a lot of people, so I don't mind that. And with anything, with any subculture that you're in, you might have to tone it down depending on your location or your setting. Like you can't always go into the office dressed in your gear. You can't always go to a family function the same way. Just so you express your interest, but at the same time, you don't have to carry it everywhere and wear it on your sleeve. So it doesn't create too much friction for me.
Mm. Uh, and do you have uh, other people who identify themselves as vampires around you? Are you a community? Do you have groups? How do you, or are you working alone and carrying
Mhm.
your message and your mission alone?
So I consider myself more of a solitary type because I don't have like, a structured, some people call it a coven or a group like that. But I've been in contact with other self-identified vampires and definitely discussed and shared ideas with them. On one of my videos on YouTube, I discussed one interesting incident with a local court that kind of wanted to get me involved, but I ended up staying solo. So it can be very isolated at times. Um, but I think that is part of the vampire experience. If you look at what the vampire is, it's often associated with being alone. It's being comfortable in your solitude. And so, yeah, you do interact with other people, but there also needs to be some time for self-reflection, and you need to be confident in yourself to be alone. I think that's the thing sometimes people miss out on today, where they're so desperate to find other people like them or find the group or mold into the group. But you have to be able to be individualistic sometimes.
Hmm. And how do you grow into what you are now? How do you go deeper into finding your purpose in this world? And do you read and you still do research?
Mhm.
Since you are doing this in a more solo approach, how
Mhm.
do you evolve as a vampire and as a human being?
Just like you said, research is a good starting point. It will only take you so far. I have like can recommend books if you like for people who are interested in that sort of thing. Um, but you also have to get out there and live it. You have to like go to events if you can. I go to clubs, goth events. The goth there are a lot of scenes that overlap with vampires. So even if there aren't other, quote unquote vampires there, you can still bring that same energy, or that same energy is still there as well. So some of those scenes will be the goth scene, the alternative punk, all that kind of scene. The BDSM scene, that's the kind of crazy one. And the cosplay and kind of like any convention scene, your Comic Cons and those type of things, and the occult scene as well too. So you talk about meditation, spirituality, all those sort of things. It intersects with so many different areas that you can move with it. It's not just one thing.
Mm-hmm. No, really interesting. I was watching before we start talking. I was watching some documentaries and some movies and some interviews about vampires and about the origin of the mythology of vampires. So what we know now and the book who made it famous is Dracula by Bram Stoker.
Yeah.
It was the latest book who really brought back the vampire and the current image we have of vampires to pop culture, in a way. And then it evolved to cinema and to theater, right? And then it really became an obsession in our pop culture. And lately, those movies, Underworld and Blade and Interview with the Vampire and so many others. Uh, but I was fascinated to also find out that actually it dates to the prehistory. The first relates and paintings and tales of creatures who needed blood to survive.
Yes.
So I was reaching that from Africa to Australia to Asia, all over the world. There are numerous paintings, stories, myths, legends walking around the communities about this. Do you have any more historical information on the evolution and the origin of the vampire myths and mythology, and also why is it so fascinating to people until these days? And we are still making movies, we are still writing books and trying to discover about vampires.
Okay. Um, well, I can say, starting with the point you made about why is it still in the ideas of people, it's because it's ideas that relate with so many core human interests. Ideas of death. Vampires are traditionally killers after all. They're predators. You can't forget that. Also, immortality. Um, the way we love each other, romance, seduction. There's always something forbidden in the vampires, and a darkness that in our day-to-day lives we kind of push aside, but is always still latent underneath. So when you embrace vampires and when you see vampires, you kind of feel that energy. That energy is existing throughout all of humanity. So that's why vampires have so much weight, have so much kind of like, why that's why vampire is a buzzword and so many people want to make movies about it. You can keep making movies on it throughout history and have interest, is because it carries all those interesting, unknown, sometimes forbidden ideas with it. And now, to the actual historical, information. So that can vary depending on the culture. You hear the tales of Dracula, which are like Transylvania. You hear, like you said, Australia, South America. They talk about, they did a lot of sacrifice of people, and that's vampiric in nature. Even there are some takes on Jesus Christ where they talk about the blood of Christ, how that could be vampiric, and what if Jesus was a vampire? So there's a lot of things. An interesting one is the Egyptian take on vampirism. I have here the Essentian Bible. I'm not saying I agree with all the ideas positioned in this take to vampires, but it kind of describes the whole Egyptian vampire mythology under the goddess, I think, Aset or Isis also, and how she is kind of like the mother of vampires. and some of the Egyptian gods are representative of that energy, and then that she gave birth to, you know, a lineage of in the what you would call like humanoid vampires or vampires that walk the earth, or even dark magicians with vampiric abilities. It's all fascinating stuff, and I like to read these sort of things, but I also like to look forward to. I don't want to just be a library of past things, but I encourage everyone to read into these sort of mythologies, and they can like shape your understanding further than just like, you know, Dracula or Twilight and all those other kind of pop culture vampires, and see a much deeper truth.
And what's your truth about this whole vampire thing, and what do you actually believe, and what are you following on how to be a vampire is our topic.
Yes.
And what are these steps on how to be a vampire? And I think also the most important question is why to be a vampire
I agree.
is relevant.
I don't feel like not enough people ask that question. They're like, yeah, I want to be one, but it's like, you know, why? what are you trying to get out of this?
Yeah.
So that's a loaded question. I'd say I try to keep things simple. I am a utilitarianist at heart. You know, I'm an anthropologist in a way. So I kind of like to pull from the culture what works, what does it value. And the core connecting theme of vampirism is maximizing one's own energy. And so you'll see that in a lot of like what you would call darker occult paths, where they talk about the power of self-individualization, self-mastery, becoming your own god, that sort of thing. So when you look in the spiritual side of vampirism, when you talk about energy work, you get a lot of that. It's the idea that there's energy in the universe, there's energy in yourself, energy in all things. And as a practitioner, as a vampire, as a dark practitioner, whatever you want to call it, one of the tools at your disposal is to draw energy, to raise energy, raise the vibrations, and gather that energy within yourself, and bind it to your will, and then direct it towards positive or constructive things in the world. So if you look at the idea of, you know, a mother and a child are riding an airplane, the airplane starts to go down. They don't tell you to put the air mask on your child first. They tell you to wear the air mask yourself, so that you have your own power, you are safe, and then you can help other people. That's the idea of what we will call the path of self-mastery. That's the idea that should be behind vampirism, where you empower yourself so you can then create change in the world. Hopefully constructive, positive change, but we're not very moralistic, so. And then on to how people can become a vampire, or what's the steps. It's one's own decision. I don't like to preach too much and try to control people's own discovery. I like to offer them information, and if they want to use that information, then they're free to use it. So I would say to anyone who has an interest in vampires or wants to potentially, or feels that they are one, is to explore more. On my links on my YouTube channel, you'll see some resources, a video instructing you on some basic resources that you can use to start that journey, through books, through a lot of them are free online resources, and a lot of experimentation for yourself, and just seeing if it works for you, if it's of value. And so that gets to why would someone even do this? Why would you wear contacts? Why would you wear the fangs? Why would you do any of this, or go through all the trouble when some people will think it's a bit crazy? And so that goes back to the idea of empowerment, though. If you find it valuable, if you find it enjoyable, if you find yourself feeling more confident, you feel more sexy doing it, then do it, you know? And don't let society stop you, and don't let society hold you back from living that fantasy. I'm asking you this: haven't you ever wanted to be a vampire when you watched those shows and movies of yours? Did that inspire you to think, what if Carlos, was a vampire?
I think I always wanted to meet vampires. So actually, I'm living this now. I think my fascination was into being able to pop up these questions and to go into the mind of a vampire,
Hmm.
and especially those if it was a real vampire who we've lived for centuries, and
Mhm.
having all that history behind, and having someone who I could ask about something that happened 300 years ago or 200 years ago. I think it was the picking that person's brain and that knowledge, and a person who has lived so much.
That's a good point too. The longevity aspect of it, immortality. Unfortunately, as you'll see with most real vampire texts, we're not immortal. We can die just like a person. I don't claim any supernatural powers here. No, but we do have a what we will call a immortality mindset, where we don't look necessarily at the world in terms of death being a bad thing or death being the end of things. We try to say that, as long as you're living your truth, as long as you're following your purpose and doing what matters in life, death is nothing to be afraid of. It's just a change of energy, really. All this is just a shell.
Mhm. And do you? I gotta ask you this about the drinking blood. And do you do this, or other current vampires carry this practice, or not at all?
So there are blood drinkers. They're called sanguinarians. But as I said, we're still susceptible to like any human diseases, so it's not very practical. And then you have to, find a donor. It's a lot of work. It's If someone is actually interested in energy work, that's probably the better route. It's the subtle energy. Um, Even the science and when they talk about in the metaphysics of blood and whether it carries energy, a lot of blood's energy is lost the moment it leaves the human body and you don't like preserve it. It's blue inside the human body a lot of times when I think it's I think it was oxidized, something like that. It's blue, and then it loses that quality. So a lot of what you call the spiritual energy of blood is lost when it's disconnected from that person or is from away from them for too long. So I don't have any interest in drinking blood. It can be kind of symbolic of the energy transfer, but the cost to one's health and the risks involved are too great to do that. But there are vampires who partake, so I don't judge too much.
And in the United States, is there a big community of vampires currently?
That's a hard one. There is a lot of subculture in the United States, and so by extent, there's a lot of vampires. Um, New York, New Orleans, those were some of like the halos, the major scenes of the vampire scene. Um, and there was like a sort of golden age of vampires. When we talked about Blade didn't just pop out of like a vacuum. It was in ways inspired by actual real subculture and real club scenes. So they had this thing in New York called the Court of Hidden Shadows, which was interesting because it was very underground, like DIY, do-it-yourself scene of mainly Black and Latina vampires and goths and like and creators and artists who came together to make this community. Kind of, have you heard of like the LGBT ball scene in New York on Pose? It's kind of like that, where you have different covens and houses, and they come out in their regallery and their finery and have a good time. So some of that has been lost. I don't see that um, being as widespread in the United States anymore. Um, there are still courts, but they have turned into more so kind of like these kind of big, kind of like not big, but these community organizations, more so than like these really urban, easy to enter groups that are actually on the street, living their truth. But there are vampires throughout the world. There's even a South African Vampire Alliance. I don't know if their website is still active, but it's close to Mozambique. So I don't know if there's a Mozambique court, though. You'll have to tell me.
I have no idea. I never met or heard about vampire groups in or communities in Mozambique.
Mhm.
But it's really interesting to know that also in Africa we have. communities. So maybe I will also Google about that and try to find out more about their their work. And if they are also in Mozambique, I'd be very interested to know and to hear about them as well. But before, you were saying you don't want or you don't like to impose your vision or your ideology into other people's. But I'm really interested in knowing about your path and your journey. So, how was it in your case to, since the moment you decided or you felt, I want to do this, I want to live like a vampire?
Yeah.
Was it one day decision, and then in the next day you are already uh, in this new persona of Darsus, or was it a gradual evolution into Darsus being born as it is now?
I think it's always a continuous process, at least for me. You know, a big moment people talk about is when they get their fangs. You know, that can be a very life-changing moment where they're like, wow, I feel good wearing these, so I want to do this more often. That definitely was a factor for me. Getting, wearing the contacts and, wearing black more, just living the life and going out like this more often. But it's always a continuous process. Presenting in public is the main thing, because it's one thing to do something at your own house and be like, yeah, this is fun. But when you start going out and living it and meeting people, and introducing yourself as a vampire, then it becomes more real. People begin to know you for that, and you put some more weight behind it. So it's a constant process. It's still happening for me. It's still growing. Sometimes there are days where I'm like, just I don't even think about vampires. It's not like I'm in the zone every single day. So it's just realistic. I wouldn't call it, too spectacular. It's just, your natural growth into any culture, subculture. You get interested and you're like, I want to learn this. And in some ways it mirrors religion. I wouldn't, well, at least I hope it's not as indoctrinated or as dogmatic, but in some ways it does mirror religion or spirituality, or joining a group like that.
And are you a religious person?
Well, I'm a spiritual.
Or more spiritual?
Yeah,
spiritual person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. No, I think it's fascinating to hear about that. It is in its essence. I think it's a journey of self-affirmation. Discovery of who you are and empowerment. And this is who I am, and this is my journey, and this is what I believe, and this is what I want to be a part of. And it must take a lot of courage to face the outside public, right?
It can be.
Yeah. I also want to know about the fear effect, the because I can imagine people looking at you, like especially children. I can imagine being afraid when they see you like this. Does that causing fear makes you feel powerful in any way, or do you like, or how do you deal with fear, your own fears, and causing fear into others?
Ooh, well, I don't know. That's a hard one, because vampires as they are now, I've never found to be scary. So I've never thought about that. If you want to see scary vampires, look at The Strain on FX. Those were vampires were called the Strigoi. They had like these little worms that then you turn into a vampire, and then you have like a stinger that comes out of your mouth, and that's how you drink blood. No fangs, just like a tentacle. That's scary vampires. This I don't know. It maybe is it's a little bit of a surprise, but most people are like, they're like, oh wow, it's different, They take a step back maybe, but I don't think I scare anybody, I'm not out there raving any heretical stuff like that or attacking anybody. So I'm just living my life. There's a lot of other actual scarier people out there, craziness going on in the world.
And what scares you, Darsuss?
Scares me, misrepresentation. Yeah, that scares me. I like to be able to speak for myself. confinement. I think I don't really have a fear of death. What I do have a fear of more so is being boxed in a space and unable to move. So stagnation, confinement, those types of things scare me more. So not being able to grow and change. But death is a part of life, and it can happen at any moment. But it's being stuck that scares me more.
Hmm. And tell me about the debt after college.
Hmm.
What is it? What is the purpose of this work?
Well, the name itself starts, because there's always in life that sort of deaths and rebirths. When you look not just into the mythology of vampires, but in a lot of things, there's an idea of uh, as you would call, a trip through the underworld, where the hero going on their journey will have to go to the underworld. Maybe the Greek heroes would have to go and face Hades and face the demons, or cross the river Styx, and then a return to glory. I forgot the actual word that describes it. There's an actual story element that describes it. But there's often in life and change a sense of death and rebirth. You'll see that in the vampire. When someone becomes a vampire, they die, they go in a coffin underground or something, or they're drained of blood, and they're reborn as a vampire. So that was key in the naming of Death After College. It's an education following, or death and a rebirth following the mainstream education of college. So death after college. And so the work that I do with Death After College is, it's on the surface on Instagram. It's a lot of just pictures, and even that it's fun, but Instagram isn't my final goal. It's more to raise interest and to raise awareness for people who want to transform their lives, who want to feel empowered, who want to live their own truth and not be afraid to do so. And so, like Morpheus has said in the Matrix, I can show you the door, but it's you who have to go through it. So that's all I do.
Hmm. And it's really funny because it's actually what I'm doing also here at is giving people a space to open their minds to listening to new experiences and new people and new ways of living and new worlds.
Yes.
And so each people makes their own choices.
Mhm.
So purpose is really to share and to inspire. So I resonate a lot with what you are saying now.
Thank you. I enjoy that kind of theme to your work as well. I think it's a powerful thing, especially when you mentioned that you yourself are a writer, and you were working to go outside of your comfort zones. Because I write some too, and I like many creative projects. And to be able to write, to be able to create, you have to get your feet wet. You have to experience more than one's own perspective. So I think that's very good.
And also, if you allow me, Darcy, just let me also share this with you because uh, I'm a writer. As I told you, I have 4 books published in
Congratulations.
Portuguese.
Mhm.
Thank you. And I'm also an events organizer. So as I looked at myself, I've been doing this for maybe 12, 13 years. So organizing events as a profession and as an entrepreneur side of me, and writing my books. And I became good at that. I know I can do that really well. And one thing I felt is that uh, I'm always I'm always used to be in the backstage.
Yes.
So either organizing events, I prepare everything, and then my artists go and show and shine.
Mhm.
Uh, and writing my books, I write. It's a solo thing, a solitary work, and then I put it into the world, and people go and look at it, and I don't need to be in the forefront. I don't need to be exposed. I don't need to be out there. And and I decided that as a communicator, and events and books are all about a part of communication, I should be able to do it all if I
Mhm.
want to be really good. So I'm pushing myself here to be in the face speaking, putting myself out there, getting out of my comfort zone, because this is our way to evolve and to become better. at what we do. And by doing this, I will become even better as a writer because I'm listening to fascinating stories. I'm meeting interesting people like you. So
Thank
I
you.
think we really grow when we step out of our comfort zone.
I agree totally.
Yeah. And that's and tell me about what is your purpose looking forward, let's say in 10, 20 years. What do you personally want to achieve, or your goals, or your dreams, your vision to these worlds, and also to that after college?
Hmm. Well, like you, I enjoy writing. So one of my goals is to write a book, which has been a struggle. This year I was, for at least a month or so, I was working on a book, um, and it was like pulling teeth. It was it was about vampires. I try to stick to an area where I already have an audience to some degree, but I don't know. It's like, nowadays it feels like the world is changing such. I don't know if people are necessarily want to read. I wrote a post or a poem not too long ago about people don't read the same way they used to. So it's hard to get people to sit down and read or invest their time and energy in your book nowadays. You have to build up that audience, build and kind of probe them and see what they want and what you can provide that they will be interested in. So I'm still formulating that. I'm still, maybe I need to work on some smaller projects, smaller stories. And also thinking of, like, the medium, the format. People are more willing to listen to an audiobook nowadays than to, hook up a couple page book and sit there and read it, because they can do something else as they read it at the same time. So I do want to write a book. Um, I also want to keep making YouTube videos. I find YouTube videos and growing on YouTube more enjoyable than Instagram. I feel like Instagram is more accessible, but YouTube is more enjoyable. I can get through more complicated ideas, like we're getting deeper here today. We can do this on a live stream podcast type format, but you can't do that so much on Instagram or TikTok. I don't use TikTok. It's too quick for me. It's just like pew, pew, pew. No, it's too quick. Um, and then also, and this is very much in what the vampires would call the night side. I still have my day side life too, so I balance these goals with my career. I work in logistics and, like, those type of things as well. So a lot of times we're doing event planning and the movement of supplies. So I want to continue moving forward in those areas, because that money and that investment fuels all that you see here. Like, I can't buy earrings without money. I can't, like, do all this equipment to film and to write and get a book edited. That costs money. So I need to grow there as well too. And I'd like to see more of the world. So I'd like to travel. I want to be a global citizen. As you probably know, the United States is not looking too hot right now. It's a little bit crazy in the United States. So I want to explore my options outside the United States as well. So it's write a book, create more
Yes.
content, and travel and grow my career, I'd say.
Mhm. Yes, I want also to, as you are a black man in the States and you are in Washington, in the
Yeah.
epicenter of this madness, tell me a bit more about how things are and how do you see the racial tension going on?
Um, well, hmm. It's hard here because a lot of us, we're so connected to, the federal life here. Almost everyone supports the government in some way. I don't mean politically. I mean in terms of our jobs and our economy here in Washington D.C. So our relationship to the government is a lot different than other people's. It's the main provider. The whole economy of Washington D.C. was shuts down if the government closed jobs. All the drivers, all the restaurants, all the engineers, all that would just, people lose so much money without the government. So we have a way of, it's liberal here, but we may not speak out about the government in the same way that others do if we live here or you're from here. I don't know. That's just my take. So in terms of the current events and the racial violence, I'm taking time to educate myself. I'm actually listening to an audiobook. It's called It's about the Black Panthers. It's what is it called? It's called. It's if I can bring this up here. It's called. Damn, I can't find. Oh, Black Against Empire. So it's the history of the Black Panther movement, Huey Newton, and all those people, all those freedom fighters. And I don't feel like I'm ready to speak on issues of racial divide. I am ignorant to a lot of it myself. I grew up in actually Northern Virginia, and I was in a way sheltered from a lot. My experience growing up was in a very diverse area. The school had like Black people, Spanish people, Asian people, Middle Eastern people. So I didn't feel that kind of divide firsthand. I see it more now when I enter the professional world. I see the divide, and just in general in DC, the kind of economic situations of certain groups. But I don't feel like I'm the person who can speak to that. I can, however, speak to the ideas of blacks in alternative scenes like Black Goths, blacks who in the LGBT scene a little bit more, or something like that. But as to the universal United States racial divide, I think there are people who are good at it, and everyone has an opinion. My purpose right now is to learn more, to sit back and learn, and to try to reflect and grow.
And that's very wise of you, because in these days, since we all have a platform and we can all record the video and put our opinions out there, a lot of people are speaking without knowledge,
Yeah,
without
yeah.
educating themselves.
Mhm.
So I think it's very wise of you to take this time to really educate yourself, to know more, and when you feel free, or if you feel ready to do it, then you will speak with the
Mhm.
proper knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So I really applaud that.
Thank you. Thank
And one thing, Darcy, I was thinking now is that as you were speaking about your life and your journey, I think it is also a lot of because of creativity. So it takes a lot of courage, because and you asked me if when I've watched those movies, if I ever thought about being a vampire or becoming a vampire, and I told you I never did.
you. Yeah.
Uh, but as a writer, what I do is putting myself in the minds of different characters,
Yeah.
because it helps me building stories and creating books. So I often have to be different people in my mind, but I think it takes a lot of courage to take the extra step and making my life and transforming myself physically into something else, into a different shape, into a different persona. And I never did that as a writer. What I do is all in my head. So
Mm.
if I'm writing a book about a woman, I become that woman for a period of 1 month, and no one
Yeah.
else knows it.
Mhm.
But in my mind, on my inside here, I'm that person, I'm that character,
I
and
know
then I
exactly.
close.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Mhm.
think it takes a lot of courage to be living that story every day, uh, like you are doing, and so publicly, because it's really you discovering yourself through creativity, through imagination, and through really exposing yourself to the world, and sharing this journey and this path you are taking.
Thank you. That sums it up exactly. Kind of. That's how I look at it too. Where to be a creator, you need to really get into the mind of your subject. It can be done in many different ways. Like you mentioned, I kind of feel that same idea because when I was writing this past month, I had a few characters. One was a man, one was more of a like a gender neutral person, and the other was like a woman. So I had to bounce back and forth between them, and I know what you mean about getting in the head of characters and getting into their space. And it's not how you yourself would react to conflict, but how would they react? How would they feel? So the only way to really know that is, like you said, to really truly empathize with them, is to separate the barriers between them. That kind of goes more with what we should or we try to do as humans, to really understand each other, and what kind of is lost in the current climate where there's this huge divide. The media just is pushing people apart the politicians are pushing people into their various camps rather than bringing them together. Um, Even with the COVID, you have people who are for masks, and people against. It's always this, either you're with me or you're against me. There's less empathy, So I think
Mhm.
that's important, and
Yeah.
artists are championing that message.
Let me share you something about writing. As someone who's been doing this for a while and publishing books. And the good things about books is that they are immortal, not like us, right? As
Hmm.
you're saying. So the books can be real vampires
Hmm.
and they live eternally. So uh, if you are writing a book, do it because you love the art and the story you are writing, and don't think that much about the audience. So write in the way you feel you should write. And if you feel the your story is a long format, do it in a long format. If you feel your story lives in a shorter format, do it as it should. But do it because the story is pushing you to do it that way, not because of the audience. Because the beautiful thing about books is that we are here in 2020, but my book will still be here in 500 years. So this trend of today might be different in 50 years, and I don't know. So don't do it because of trends or because of the market we are living now, but do it because you actually love the art and you have something to share with the world.
That is some good advice, and that's something I continue to struggle with balancing. Because I always have that motive of how people will they receive it? Will they get value from it? It's hard to be nowadays more so an artist who really puts their own will forward, unfiltered, and just believes in that and just creates, because we're so much looking for approval from people, and like
Yeah,
you said, if it's
I get it.
marketing, and so I do want to do that, and then but it's something that I feel like I have to build that trust in myself. Like you said, you were able to do it, and I applaud you for that, and I'm still getting there in a way. I
Mhm.
don't know. To
No,
me, it's a lot of
and
balance between the two.
the other thing, Darcy, is that that's the following step is how to put it into how to make it accessible to people.
Oh,
That
after.
comes after, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So first step is if I'm feeling something inside of me, just like you felt the vampire Darsus being born inside of you when you decided to leave it, and then the rest you find out as you go along. But with books, and I totally agree with that. I actually have been in some meetings with writers, and I'm one of the younger writers in my editor, in my publisher. So I usually meet with older writers, and they complain a lot about people are not reading, and these young people are not reading books.
Yeah.
And what I usually tell them is that no, people are actually reading, and I believe people are actually reading more these days than maybe 20 or 50 years because more people know how to actually read.
That's
But
true.
people are reading in a different format. People like reading quotes. People like sharing uh, sentences, quotes, memes, nice stories on WhatsApp and on Instagram. And people are always sharing ideas and quotes and sentences. So people still cherish and still feel pleasure by reading a good story, by nice words, nice ideas. But what I'm doing now as a writer is that instead of fighting the market and the trends, what I my advice is write what you want to write and
Hmm.
what you really need to leave. And what you do is that you can put that content into small bite sizes and publish.
Hmm.
So write your book is what I do. I write a 200 pages book.
Yeah.
I can be putting one nice quote per week on my Facebook or Instagram page. And then I'm having I'm giving people snack size content, and they
Yeah.
like reading that. But I'm still being honest to my way of writing and my way of believing and cherishing my art. So that's a different way on how to put it out there, and you can explore different ways, or you can make videos like this video. I'm going to read you one page of my new book, and you
Okay.
make it a 2 or 3 minutes video. That's a different way of packaging and delivering. But the 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 most important part is the creation, and in that part, I completely advise you to be selfish and do it because you love and you feel it.
That is a powerful message. I actually wrote some of down what you were saying because yeah, that's something I needed to hear in my artistic development. And yeah, I'll put that into practice. I'll try that because that's been going on in my mind, especially these past few months where we're stuck at home and we have to just be with ourselves and our own work, and we're evaluating our own work. Sometimes you're wondering, oh, is this good or this bad? And then all you see is there's just so much social media that you're more in tune that you want to be with the outside world when you really need to be looking inside and what you want to create. So I definitely agree there, and I will try to do that some more.
Yeah. And let me share you one last story, Darcy. Is that before this episode, a lot of people asked me, uh, is he a real vampire? Is he crazy? And I told people, I don't know. I want to find out. And that's why I invited him to talk, to know more about him and why he is living like this, why he's working in this way. My motivation is curiosity, and is to really understand people and people who are different from me. And a few a few months ago, I think a couple of months ago, I received a picture on WhatsApp, and it was a brain test, and it was a an image of a Snickers. I don't know if you've seen this, and it says which color are these Snickers. So some people see it in gray or something gray and green, and some people see it in pink, and
Mm,
it's fascinating. I did the test in my house, and we are four: me, my wife, and my 2 kids. So two of us saw it in one color, and the other two saw it in a different color.
yeah.
And the explanation was that it depends on the brain sides who are more evolved in each one of us. People who have the right side more evolved see it in one color, and people who have the left side more evolved in our brain see it in another color. And my message to my children was, this is just to show you that it's not a question of, in life, in the world in general, it's not a question of it it's wrong or it's right, or my reality is the only reality. It's just to show you that even a color of a sneaker, it's right if it's pink, if your brain sees it as pink, and if it's right if you see it as gray. So uh, just accept that in this world we have different people. We are all different, and our truth and our nature is the one we have to follow and to obey to. And this is something I really want to share with you, and this is a part of the reason I wanted to have the conversation, is really to understand your nature, your world, and to make it a part of my world now. And now I know I've met Darsus, who identifies himself as a vampire. And in his world, in his reality, it's true. It's his nature, it's his journey. And we should all learn to embrace the differences and to grow with them.
Mm. And I've met Carlos Osvaldo, and experienced some of your world and your tips on creativity and writing, and your project Freestyle Talks, which I thank you for inviting me on.
No, my pleasure, Darcy. And keep up doing your work, and keep up digging more and
Mhm.
educating yourself, and and let the creativity spark and leave, uh, set it free. I think it's going to do amazing things in your life and in your world as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for accepting my invitation from all the way in Mozambique and for taking 1 hour to be with me and with my audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate getting to talk to you and to explore some of these concepts, to hear your point of view, and to get to share mine, because sometimes I have all this stuff floating around in my head. I actually have to do some thinking of how I wanted to present it. So thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
So thank you, Darsuss, and stay safe, okay?
You as
In the
well.
madness happening around you.
It is something. Take care.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, Bye bye. Thank you. So that was it, everybody. Our amazing conversation with Darsus on how to be a vampire. And the message I'm closing is really this one: is to let's embrace who we are, our true nature. Let's live it to the fullest. And it doesn't matter who likes it, who doesn't, who supports us, who doesn't. Darsus is doing an amazing thing of being who he